I actually work for Premier Christian Communications, as in most people know Premier Radio, the Christian radio station. I am actually the director for Premier Lifeline, the confidential telephone helpline for Premier. And today, actually, we had in London a get-together of all the Premier staff from the different locations to get together and have a day to meet up and re-envision everyone and to, really just get together. First time we've had a London, a team day where we could all just get together and look at why we do what we do. And so, yeah, today's actually been very busy, but in a very different way to normal.
And is it the kind of busy that energizes you? Is it the kind of busy that drains you?
That's a really good question. It's the kind of busy which in one sense energizes me, although somewhat strangely, I guess one would probably say that I'm an introvert. Although it's a classic situation that if you see me on stage speaking or hosting, or if you see me in sort of settings somewhat like today, you might be thinking, no, he's an extrovert. But actually, in many ways, I probably would be seen more of an introvert, really. And so for me, social gatherings are actually quite hard work.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing where I guess people who are on the autistic spectrum might well relate to that sort of thing, where sometimes they can actually cope with situations. But on the other hand, it can be incredibly hard work.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. So today's great. It was it's a really good day. But on the other hand, it was not. I found it really very tiring and draining, and at times took time out from the social bit just to get some space and breathing space and that sort of thing. And I think sometimes people have to do that, and it's not always understood. If you're part of a gathering of people, sometimes you're expected to be always active, always speaking, always doing what you have to do, and to perform. And but sometimes actually you get to the point of having to take a breath and actually take some space and actually learn what you need. And sometimes you have to stick with what you need.
So it sounds like what you really needed after the end of this day was to come on to a talkathon at 11 o'clock at night and talk about men's mental health.
Absolutely, especially when I have the length of time it took me to join. And the strange thing it wasn't your link that was the problem. It's the fact that the way my system is set up, it would not let me join from the email address that you sent me because of security purposes, because of it was my work address it was sent to. I just had to literally sort of deal with that. But again, it's not the easiest of things. And then you start thinking, now what am I going to do? I'm meant to be doing the talkathon. Everyone's expecting me to be there, and everything seems to be going wrong.
Jonathan, it's absolutely fine. We started off the day with a no-show, so I feel like you joining 15 minutes in is from that point on, everybody that joins, even if they're horrendously late, it's a blessing. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. You work for. I mean, you've got a few different. You do lots of things because you always seem to be on the move and doing stuff. But one of the jobs you do is working for Premier Lifeline. And before, I would love to drill into that. I'd love to understand. One of the things I'd really love to understand is what kind of people are calling up. What are the kind of things that you see as kind of regular themes from people that call up through Lifeline? But before we get into all of that, I'd love to just hear a bit more about your journey. Why did you end up there? What's your journey been with some of the issues that we've been chatting about today?
Right. my professional background is actually in mental health. And one of the interesting questions, why do people go into mental health as a profession? What is it that leads people into that area? And it's quite interesting for me because I've often reflected on that one. I come from a family where, when I was growing up, my grandmother had what was then would be described now as bipolar, was then described as manic depression. And so as a child, actually, it was quite interesting experiencing a member of the family having quite a significant mental health issue and the effect it had on her. But also, in a sense, within the family itself, I think it's pretty fair to say my father had a breakdown when he was quite young, when he was in his teens. And that probably affected him for the rest of his life, but also affected how he responded to people. And I sort of grew up in a home which was always sort of welcoming of welcoming the stranger, the people who didn't quite fit into the rest of society. So actually, I grew up in a home which had that sort of feel of looking at life in a slightly different perspective, put it that way. And it's interesting enough, both my brother and myself ended up in mental health as careers. Actually training is different professions, but our roles overlap somewhat. So for me, it was, I think there were family reasons why I got involved in mental health. And yeah, for a number of years, very much that was my specialist area. Running parallels, working as a church minister and having links within the voluntary sector. I then, within mental health, specialised in looking after people, responding to people who were suicidal, self-harming, and to a certain degree, people with personality disorder issues, and then trauma. And so I sort of did some specialising, but the issues around suicide and self-harm, I was always firefighting. I was always helping people, picking up the pieces, looking after them after they arrived at the hospital. And one of the things about Lifeline is that we're actually there trying to help people before they get to that stage. I don't know how many people listening would actually know what Premier Lifeline is, but if I was to say to you, most people know what the Samaritans is. The Samaritans offers emotional support to people at a point of crisis, often if they may well be suicidal or self-harming or going through some major emotional situation and they need someone to talk to. But the thing about the Samaritans is it's a faith-neutral organisation. Everyone assumes, because of the name, the Samaritans, and because it was actually set up by an Anglican minister, that there is a faith basis to the Samaritans. But actually, when it was set up, the founder very, very carefully ensured that it was faith neutral, so that there was nothing about it that might deter people from calling. Which is great. It's absolutely brilliant. I've got nothing against that as the concept. But it did leave a gaping hole of where you had Christians wanting to phone up to talk about life from a Christian perspective, and wanting to explore what help could be found, but from people who are knowingly sort of sharing your faith. And so one thing that Lifeline can do, which you couldn't have at the Samaritans, even if you got a Christian talking to a Christian, is actually exploring life from a faith perspective. So Lifeline offers the emotional support, which you'd get from the Samaritans, but it's emotional and spiritual support from an overtly Christian perspective. And so in that sense, in many ways, when I looked at working with Lifeline, it was to do something like, in a sense, it's similar to the work of the Samaritans, responding to people at that time of need, looking after people, giving people a chance to talk about how they're feeling, how, what's building up in their lives, and giving them a chance to sort of have that pressure that's built up reduced because often people's lives, things happen, it builds up. It's like a pressure cooker getting up, building on the inside. And at some point, it's going to burst in some way. And actually, one of the big things that I honestly do believe is that people need to be given that chance of talking, offloading, and begin to let some of that pressure out.
Mm-hmm. That's, I mean, it's amazing to hear that journey, and kind of understanding, actually, you've ended up in Premier Lifeline because actually you can see it's being part of the solution before the problem hits, which is great. If I can I jump back a bit?
Yeah, of course.
Back to your experience of growing up in a home where you said your father had a breakdown in his teens, so I'm assuming you weren't around yet. So you grew up in an environment where your father had a breakdown, and that really impacted him. How did that affect the family environment? So did it mean that mental health was talked about quite openly? Was that a positive thing? Was it a negative thing? What was your experience like?
Well, we're going back quite a long time now. So it wouldn't have been talked about in the way that we talk about it now. Things have changed dramatically over the years.
Yeah.
I think it was something. It was in the background, but it wasn't necessarily talked about. But it was reflected in attitudes, in the way that there was always that looking out for the people who might need some additional support.
Yeah.
So it's much more a recognition of what he had been through, recognition of showing love and care and concern and support to people, but without necessarily overtly saying why. It's much more of how it affected him in his life and his to others.
Do you remember ever having a conversation with him about it? About that period of his life and kind of what caused the breakdown?
I had more of a conversation with my mother about it.
Yeah.
To be honest, my father was an incredibly private person about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And even now, it feels a bit strange talking about him in this way.
Yeah.
But it certainly but when I learnt about what had happened to him, I think it explained a lot about how he was and his attitudes and his life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And what do you think drew? Do you say it was your brother as well that also went into mental health?
Yes.
And what do you think drew him into it? Was it the same reasons that drew you into it?
To be honest, I have no idea. He's older, but it is quite strange that both of us ended up having careers in mental health.
Yeah.
And very definite careers in mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you find working with, you said sort of suicide and self-harm? When you reflect back on that period of your life, what are some of your takeaways? Did you enjoy, doesn't feel like the right word, but was it an intentional move away from that? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the rewarding aspects?
Yeah, it was an intentional move to that. I honestly felt that God was calling me to specialize in that area.
Yeah.
The way my career had worked was that I had some experience of working with what was then called a para-suicide team in one area, and then I actually worked for what was then the National Schizophrenia Fellowship as one of their area managers. So at that point, specializing in working within the area of schizophrenia, but actually within a condition like schizophrenia, the number of people who are suffering from schizophrenia who at some point will consider suicide is actually quite high. And certainly when when I was with this National Schizophrenia Fellowship, this research they did was something like 10%, 1 in 10 of the sufferers of schizophrenia would be potentially likely to attempt suicide.
Wow.
So that's a significant percentage. It could well be higher than that now. I'm not sure about the exact percentages now. But the fact is that that also reinforced to me just the significant question about what can be done, how can people be helped. Whilst I was working for them, I was asked to help set up a new project looking after people who were going through a particular hospital in an area, and sort of health authority area. And so for a number of years was the specialist working in deliberate self-harm and suicide prevention. For me, I felt God was opening a door. Particularly, I wasn't actually looking for the job. They came to me offering me one. And I felt that God was saying, this is the time to do something, be put in a very special place. It was a privileged place on the basis that I was actually working with people who were at a point in their life where they, by the time they came to see me most of the time, they'd got to the point where they had a decision that they could not see life continuing, that death had been an option. And I would be seeing them looking after what would be helpful to work with them, spend time working alongside them, offering counselling, offering support, looking at what needed to be done to help them the next step, to find hope, find meaning, find the help they needed with whatever it was behind the scenes of that, which had caused them to attempt suicide. That may well have been issues around a relationship problem, or gambling, or an addictive behavior like alcohol, drugs. It may well have been them suffering from depression which wasn't being treated properly, or they were at a vulnerable stage when they were discharged from a hospital. It may well have been issues around schizophrenia. It may have been that they'd been told that they were suffering from a significant health problem, which they, for whatever reason, they saw that as something they couldn't face or deal with. I've known people with early onset dementia. Once they realised what was happening, attempt suicide. I've also known people, and this goes back to when the era I first went into this area, people suffering from HIV/AIDS, and how they were dealing with that. So I've over the years met a whole host of different people who have been dealing with situations in their lives. And often, if they don't have someone to help them at that particular time, it does build up. It does get to the point of thinking, where am I going to go with this? Can I cope with this? What are my options in life? And there is often that question of, is death an option? Is escape? Or I just want to go to sleep, but actually go to sleep and not wake up, which is intense from the point of view of suicide. Over the years, I would have interviewed and worked with literally thousands of people in that sort of setting.
And when you reflect on the thousands of people in that sort of setting that you've supported, do you see any common trends from the kind of people that end up in that desperate situation, either in terms of the kind of things that they're struggling with, or the kind of support, or probably lack thereof, they have around them? Any particular trends? And I guess a second question to that, have you seen that change at all? Like, have you seen there being a shift over the years? Because the statistic doesn't seem to have changed. Like, it seems as if anything, the suicide rates are getting higher and higher.
Well, certainly. Well, tonight we're talking about men's mental health.
Yeah.
One of the key things about the balance between male and female when it comes to suicide is actually often that men will use methods which are more dangerous.
Interesting.
It could be described as being the testosterone influence, but it also could well be seen as being men are more likely to not think about the outcome from the point of view of how they'll be found. And are more likely to do something which is more drastic. But the more dangerous the method, the more likely it is to work, and therefore the more likely that suicide will actually result in death, which is a real issue because if you use a method which is more likely to result in death, it's just, it really needs to be sort of intervened earlier in a way. But on balance, yes, statistics, things haven't changed. I do think when we look back at the COVID era, we are likely to have had a significant rise there. There was an enormous amount of loneliness, isolation. Support networks disappeared overnight with lockdown. The professionals were limited in what they could do. Community social networks just had to stop because of lockdown and things. And I think certainly from my experience of certain communities, the suicide rate was significantly up in some areas. And I was hearing about quite a number of people who would have been seen as being vulnerable before lockdown, who sadly ended up taking their lives. In many ways, I think what really is needed is basically people need to have someone to talk to, someone to share with, someone who they can trust. We live in a world which it's really strange because although there's social networking, a person might have 1,000 friends on Facebook or whatever the most recent thing is. In practice, it's a question of how many people one honestly is able to be real with. And if you can't be real with someone, then when something happens to you which is distressing, shameful, or whatever it may be, is challenging to your sense of who you are, then what are you going to do with it? Yeah, if you can't share it with someone, if you can't, sort of help deal with it, it's potentially just going to build up within you. And at that stage, that's where suicide is increasingly likely to happen, because, as I said earlier, that build-up becomes much more of a pressure. So that would be my response on that one.
Yeah, we did hear the statistic. I think it was Paul Benger that mentioned it, that 10 years ago, the average number of friends that the 2 a.m. friends that they could call at 2 a.m. if they were in a crisis was 2. The current number is 0.01% or something. And so people increasingly feel disconnected.
Yeah.
Connected on a surface level.
We did some work during COVID. And we did some research, and certainly it became more and more apparent that although one might expect COVID to have triggered people to have thought, I'm going to keep in touch with people by phone, when community activities stopped, a lot of people stopped calling people on the phone. The reason for that was that often the phone calls were about something like meeting up, clubs, societies, church, or whatever it was. And if you didn't have the reason for doing it, you didn't have the excuse to call them. And a lot of people are very private in all sorts of ways. And so actually what happened was that there was a dramatic drop in human contact, not just face, but actually on things like the phones, because you never had the excuse. It's one of the reasons why Premier Lifeline actually had a project. We had two projects in COVID. One was called Call 5, which was encouraging people to take the initiative to call people on a regular basis. I think Call 5 being the number of digits in a hand. So you could actually think of 5 people you would call on a regular basis and keep contact with. And the idea was also if you did 5 and you could then do another 5 with the other hand, well, you'd end up with 10. But the fact was, it's to encourage people to support each other, to share with each other, to have that ability to just be able to check in and see how people are. But the research we did just showed how lonely people were, how isolated people felt, how little contact they'd actually had from other people who were just calling to see how they were. And I think, generally speaking, we often live in a life where we might have lots of acquaintances. We might, in a sense, pass each other by in different circumstances. But how many people actually really know each other? How much do we really, as even in work, there may well be, I don't know how many people one might know through work, but actually, what do we really know about them? In fact, one of the things we did at our team day today, there were 80, 90 people there. But actually, it was one of the challenges was how well do we actually know the individual as opposed to the identity in the work setting. And you can have people that you're working alongside and then suddenly something happens with them. And you think, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that they were struggling with A, B, or C. And it's one of those times where it's one, you've got mental health first aid training now for things like the work setting to actually encourage people to recognize that there's a need to be able to offer support within work settings. Within Premier, we have the opportunity where people are actually offered the chance to call someone if they need to talk through something, to pray about something, to deal with something that's troubling them outside of the normal hierarchical human resources system. So it's separate and confidential. But that's something which can be put within a system. But on the other hand, it's far more important to try to have some networking, to have human support on a more informal basis. But actually, I do suspect it's less and less than it once was.
One of the themes that's been coming up across the day has been community. We've started talking about community a lot and how important it is to be a part of a community. Would you say that a lot of the people that call in are people that don't have access or live as part of a community, whether that be a church or is it people that are but don't feel able to talk, or like say maybe I could but I certainly can't ring them at 2 o'clock in the morning, or a combination maybe of all of the above?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. The people who call us, a complete mix of people. Some of them are physically lonely and isolated and limited in the contact they have. They may be housebound. They may be, and that could be due to physical reasons or mental health issues. There's quite a lot of people who are limited in the actual human contact they have, because if they don't go out to things, how many people actually go to them or are in contact with them? Community, I think, is absolutely essential. Many years ago, I was I worked with the church churches across Romney Marsh, trying to develop a church community liaison project. And the whole thing about that was to encourage the community to take ownership of the different things which were needed within it, and to reach out and to provide support and to encourage people to receive on a regular basis, and know where they can get the support. I think there's a lot of people who are not part of the community that we might hope they would be, to the degree that they would. Some people actually find it quite difficult within the churches. Others would be part of a church, but then it is the question of when they need support, where is the support? Is it available when they need it? Some of them are probably the people who churches have tried, but they've not really, they don't really know what to do with the person or to help the person. I think a lot of churches trying to fix people, rather than actually be there for people. And when I do a mental health training, the main day training that I do for people is actually entitled Being There. It's a starting point, actually. First and foremost, people need you to be there for them, and then what you do is to build from that. Whereas a lot of people I've known over the years, is the first thing they think about is, how can I fix this person? How can I solve their problems? How can I make them better? How can I solve whatever is perceived to be their issue? Whereas actually the first thing people need to feel is to be safe, secure, accepted, the sense they belong, that they are welcome. Some churches have worked really hard to do that, and I can think of a number of churches who come to my mind immediately when they've done an incredible amount of work with people from across a spectrum of need. And you start thinking, how much of this is intentional, or how much of it is simply an attitude of mind? Because actually, at times you have a question of what makes a mental health friendly church. But at the last couple of days before today, I was at a conference looking at disabilities as a whole, and with a number of the organizations from the Christian world working within disabilities. But whether you think about a mental health friendly church, a dementia friendly church, a disability friendly church, or whatever it might be, the key thing actually is what's needed isn't the specific understanding of a condition, whatever the condition may be, is actually an attitude of mind and a sense of being open to welcome and get to know individuals, and to give them a chance of being who they are within a setting. And what comes next is you get to know them. They are enabled to be part of the community, part of the church, part of a family, and treated as being unique in their own right, rather than trying to fit into some preconceived idea.
I think that maybe raises the question of how important is it in the kind of language that we use when we're communicating what we are as organizations. I know Paul Banjo, who was on earlier, went through his leadership team and specifically changed some of the language that they use just in everyday church life, because he realized how that was looking amongst people, and that actually it was, without realizing it, communicating what was expected, perhaps. I mean, I can't quote him exactly, it wouldn't do it justice, but it was very much being intentional about language so that people felt welcome and felt that they belong and know what it is that they're belonging to. And that therefore, in essence, creates a culture of openness where people feel safe and free to be able to be themselves. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important for people to be able to feel safe and be themselves. I went to a church service very recently where there were a number of people who were being welcomed in one sense or other into either the church or being confirmed or having a renewal baptismal vows and things like that. And the people who were involved with that were all potentially, you could see them as being people with different disabilities and different needs. And yet the church was basically saying, here we are, this is us. Us is everyone who is within this community. Us is everyone who is unique and special to God. Us who are all welcome to respond to God as we are. And individuals were uniquely being able to express who they were as part of the fellowship and being welcomed. It's very hard to describe the experience of that afternoon service where it was almost like a culmination of the work of a particular church over I don't know how many years, where they had just turned life upside down from the point of view of, rather than being to attend this church you've got to be like us, to being we are open to everyone, come in, you're welcome, and we want you to experience something of the faith and love of Jesus and get to know God and be you. And I could go into all sorts of details of just some of the unique ways they've actually adapted the services, the times, what they provide. But it wasn't, but all of that's come out of just some special aspect of, I think, just love for people, wanting to be a church for everyone within their community and saying, yeah, come, we want you to be part of us. Whereas actually I can think of lots of people who go to a church and they think the first thing is, do I fit? Am I welcome? Am I sitting in the right place? Am I saying the right things? Am I dressed in the right way? What happens if I don't sit still? What happens if I need to go out to the loo once or twice during the service? What happens if and then if you're going with someone you're caring for, right? So maybe someone, maybe you're a husband and wife and the wife has dementia, and the person with dementia is not necessarily able to concentrate on the service as much as they once did. How does the church respond to how that person behaves, moves, walks about, whatever? A personal experience of that was my parents were lifelong church attendees. My father used to be incredibly active in church leadership. But then at some point they stopped going to church. And I assumed it was because of my father's physical health problems, because he had some disabilities, and I assumed it was that. It actually wasn't. It was because the church couldn't cope with the fact that my mum, who had dementia, would not settle and be able to focus on listening to long sermons. And it was getting embarrassing for my father to be there with my mum, who was less able to concentrate on within the service. At which point they stopped going. Right. And in lots of settings, churches then sort of think, oh, they don't want to come anymore. We want to, and often people fall off the end at the end of life. If you think about it, we're talking about men's mental health. My father was left high and dry not having the fellowship he needed, not having the support he needed, because he was the carer. And they weren't going to church because of my mum's need, because of her dementia. So, you know, it's you know, it's not just young. The whole thing spreads across the whole gambit, really. And it's not just the person who has the mental health problem. It's often also the people who are caring for them. Whether it's husband, wife, friends, whether it's parents, children, it's all of those things as well. And often it's, I'll be honest, it's the carers who are often left out of the support. Then if they're not looking after themselves, there's always the risk that the carers become the person next in line to have the health problems, to end up with physical health problems or mental health problems. And you know, they end up burning out because they're throwing their lives into looking after someone who needs them. Yeah,
that's great insight. That's really, really good. I'm so pleased and grateful that you shared that, because it does again bring us back to the wider conversation about how we do things intentionally, and to even think about things like that in church, that's a thing that's happening right across the country. That there are churches where there are people caring for elderly partners or parents, children with additional needs, all of these things. I mean, I've seen some of these things happen. A friend of mine actually specializes in helping addicts into recovery, Christian recovery, and setting up rehabs and all sorts of amazing things that God does. But one of the things that he actually set up within his charity was to make sure that the parents and family members of those people who were struggling with addiction were also getting supported, because he realized the same as what you've just said. They were going unheard and unseen, other than, you know, just the elements of support that they were given. But in many cases, families had been dealing with this for, you know, in some cases decades of all the difficulty, and people who'd been through overdoses or been through rehab before. And he said that the toll that was taking on the mental health of the family was probably no different. It was different, but as bad as what the addicts themselves were going through. So I think you raise a really good point there.
Certainly over the years, I've often worked alongside not just the person who was nominally my client, who would have been the person suffering from a mental health issue, or often quite severe mental health issues. But I also tried to spend time looking after their key carers. And often that might well be potentially parents or siblings or spouses or children. But often people don't realize just how difficult it is to cope with someone you love going through such difficult times. And let's be realistic, in certain mental health conditions, behaviors can be somewhat traumatic and challenging and difficult. And at times, particularly for persons having significant thought disorder, the carers can end up being accused of all sorts of things, and it can be incredibly hard. And the number of people who are traumatized by that is quite significant. So even if you're not the one that with the severe mental health problem, you know, the person alongside them can end up being, for all practical purposes, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder caused by some of the experience of actually looking after someone with a mental health problem.
Yeah, I can see that's again another very good point.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm aware of the fact you've had a long day, and it's we've just hit midnight. But before we wrap up, I feel like we haven't actually heard a huge amount about Premier Lifeline. I really don't want to keep you much longer, but I just wondered if there's anything more that you wanted to say about that. And one of the things I was particularly interested in is, Are there any common themes about the kind of people that are calling up? And obviously, we're talking about men's mental health. Do you like? I don't know if you have statistics on the amount of men versus women that call up, and then the different things that they're calling up about.
I think predominantly, well, the sort of themes are loneliness, isolation, mental health issues of a whole range, health issues, and facing changes in their lives, concerns about their individual health, but also the health of other people. Often people call us if they've had some news about something, and whether it's, they're being investigated for cancer, or they've got a loved one who's facing an operation, or the people want to talk about the challenges they're facing in life. When it comes to mental health, it's the whole breadth of mental health, from stress, anxiety, fear, through to depression, dealing with the sort of issues around trauma, but also schizophrenia, bipolar, what historically would have been seen as personality disorders, but it's that complete mix. But interestingly, we may have, we do have a number of people with long-term mental health issues who are calling us on a semi-regular basis. But actually, often what they're calling about is issues around life and dealing with life, on the basis that, they've got a limit about what they can or can't do. There's a limit about their employability. There's a limit about the impact, because of the impact of the medication they're on. But actually, they're often calling us about other things as well. And sometimes people identify with the illness when actually what I desperately try to encourage our volunteers to do is to see them as individuals and to try to support them as people. Even if they say to us, I'm so-and-so, I'm a schizophrenic, the fact that they're schizophrenic doesn't necessarily mean that's the key thing that they want to talk about. They're always identifying with that, because that's what everyone identifies them to be. From the point of view of male, female, I think we probably have a significant shift towards female, not male, because it's actually quite difficult at times to get men to ask for help, to call. It does feel it's easier to get to women to actually call and get help. It's certainly something we want to ensure that as time goes by, that everyone feels able to call, and we need to build up the number of callers from the male community, because actually, as we were saying earlier, they are, they've got the mental health needs, they've got the challenges in life as much as the women do. And actually, when it comes to suicide, there is a significant risk there, because I still believe, from everything I've heard in recent years, that the risk of a male person attempting suicide and it resulting in death is still higher, partly because what they will do is potentially more dangerous. It's more sudden, more reactive, more impulsive, maybe, in the way men tend to behave. And actually, that needs the intervention even more, which is why there are charities which specialise in working with men and their mental health, because it's recognised just how difficult they are to reach, but also how risky it is, and how dangerous it can be. But from Lifeline's perspective, we want to be there for people, so that they can call us, talk. It's someone to talk to, someone to listen to them. We look to offer them emotional and spiritual support. We offer prayer if it's wanted. And at times we'll forward people on to, or we would signpost people to specialist agencies of all sorts of places. And Mercy's has been for a long time, probably significantly more than a decade, one of the key organisations that we've referred people on to, albeit Mercy has changed to some degree. It's where it's sort of directing its attention now, but I've known Mercy for more years than I can remember, really, from the early days of Mercy UK.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Quick question: is Premier Lifeline 24/7? Is it?
No, not. We're open Monday to Friday 9 till 5.
Yeah.
We don't open public holidays. It's quite strange that over the years we had extended our hours. A couple of years ago we consolidated them to Monday to Friday 9 till 5. We're not able to offer that service where people call us in at crisis points to the degree that we once had. But we are there to support people if in a slightly more sort of saying to people, call us before it gets to crisis point. I recognise that organisations like the Samaritans are very much there from the point of view of being available 24/7. And it's interesting, and has been the case for decades, that one of the reasons why the Samaritans at times tend to be busier at certain times of the day and days of the week is because it's where everyone else is not open and they are. But no, at the moment we are we're very much trying to focus on reaching as many individuals as we can and encouraging individuals to contact us, as opposed to offering a maintenance type support network, in that it's very easy for people to end up calling Lifeline on a very regular basis. I mean regular being regularly throughout each day, every day. But actually what we try to do is to support people, but also encourage people to be part of communities, to actually look at what is available within their local area. Because I'm very realistic that Premier Lifeline can only do a certain amount. What people really need to support where they are in their home area. But for those who are have limited current support, Lifeline can help towards that. Or if people are experiencing something specific at the moment, again, Lifeline can be there for them at that time. But one would hope they'll be able to find support within a local community. And of course, sometimes we get calls from the clergy and others, because sometimes people call us purely on the basis that
coming in. I'm kind of literally about to go to bed. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I kind of just thought I'd come and see if you needed a cup of tea or a cup of coffee.
Oh, bless you.
A little midnight snack.
I can, I'll pop that on in a bit.
That's all right, I don't mind getting it for you. Should I take this out? It really smells in here.
I don't think it's the food that's smelling.
No, it's definitely the food. It's like sushi shouldn't be left on the floor for this amount of time.
That is fair.
Right, so honestly, cups of tea, coffee, hot water, herbal teas.
I'll take a cup of tea, actually.
Just straight cup of tea.
Straight with a bit of sugar in it. Yeah.
Same?
So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thanks.
Thank
Right.
you.
Jonathan, can I get you a cup of tea?
thank you.
You're well looked after. We are.
Yeah, I can kind of get used to this. Like just sit in the garden room and just kind of have chats, and people bring you food and drink, and it's quite the lifestyle. Jonathan, we've kept you till midnight. You've had a long day. No doubt your wife's going, come on, Jonathan, time to get to bed. So we will let you go, but we just want to say thank you so much for squeezing us in at the end of your busy day. Thank you for all you do for Mercy, the way you champion us. Thank you for all you're doing through Premier Lifeline, and we'll make sure we keep linking people to that as well, as a resource. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me. I'm sorry again for being a bit late, but
oh, don't. That's all that matters.
Okay, that's fine.
Rest well.
Hope it all goes well.
Thanks.
You. Take care.
Okay, bye.